I'm delighted to say a few words at the opening of the second Climate and Nature Summit, and I warmly congratulate the Irish Schools Sustainability Network on this wonderful initiative. I'm aware that the summit is for both primary and for secondary schools, and I welcome the fact that so many teachers participated last year during COP26, and I hope even more will be participating during this year. I was impressed to see Irish students over the past few years striking for the Fridays for Future and linking with that global movement. But this summit approach over a week builds further on that involvement of students and education, and it provides online lessons on a range of climate-related themes, which teachers can show in classrooms. And I'm also very impressed by the videos that ISSN have launched as 5 minutes of sustainability. This is a great idea, the actions that everyone can take. And I know that students, when they take those actions, are going to influence their parents, and they're going to influence the wider family, and they're going to influence their communities. I know that this idea of a summit should give rise to activities in school all year round, not just during the week of the summit. But you will have a particular focus on COP27 in Egypt, which you're coinciding with. And this is the African COP. And this means you need to think a lot about climate justice. As you know, the carbon emissions that are causing the problem and the crisis and the loss of biodiversity are the result of actions in industrialized countries like Ireland, and increasingly in emerging big economies like China and India and Russia. But the worst impacts have been felt by those least responsible. So let me explain a bit more about the layers of injustice that mean we need to have a climate justice, people-centered approach to climate and nature crisis, and in particular to COP27. I'd like to talk about at least 5 layers. And the first is that the climate crisis has hit the poorest countries and the poorest communities and the small island states disproportionately and much earlier. When I was president of Ireland, I didn't speak about climate because Ireland wasn't suffering at the time. We didn't know. And, you know, as I say, these are the least responsible. And also, they do happen to be the Black and brown and indigenous people of our world. So it's also a racial injustice. Secondly, within that, you have the role of women. Very often, they have less power. They may have less rights, like land rights. They have less access to credit, less training, and yet they have to build resilience in their communities. They have to go further in drought for water or firewood. And women are making a difference on the ground, but they're doing it under double difficulty of the worst impact of climate. And then we have the third issue is the intergenerational injustice. I don't have to say anything about that because children and young people have been calling us out on the fact that we're loading their future if we don't do now what we have the power to do. And they don't have power, but they're telling us, please do it because we won't have time. It'll be worse for us. And they're right. And the fourth injustice is a bit subtle, but it's worth thinking about. The industrialized world, including Ireland, we built our economies on fossil fuel. So we have to, value the work of workers in the coal and oil and gas, and in Ireland, peat, turf, who helped us to build our economy. And now we have to wean off with climate justice. And as you know, there's a lot of emphasis on climate justice in the Midlands bog area in Ireland to both have more of the green jobs in those areas for those communities, but also the rewilding of the bog, the natural way of doing it. And then the fifth injustice, of course, is to nature herself. You've read about, I'm sure, the loss of biodiversity, the terrible extinction of species. I mean, we are putting ourselves at risk. If we get rid of bees and insects, we won't have food, So your teachers, I'm sure, will want to talk about all of these things. And in the COP in Egypt, COP27, we want to redress these through development measures like doubling climate action finance by 2025, which was talked about in and promised in the COP in Glasgow. There isn't a pathway yet, so that's something to talk about. Secondly, you'll hear a lot about loss and damage. We need a finance facility for loss and damage as we, in COP27, because, things are happening in countries. Look at Pakistan. A third of the country has been underwater. Farmers have lost everything. They've lost their fields, they've lost their crops, they've lost their homes. How do you adapt to that? No, you need channeled, loss and damage that takes account of the total destruction that can take place after a hurricane, or in this case, after the severity of the flooding. So let me end with what I'm doing with women leaders, because I'd like to share this with you and get you on board. We learned from one of our women leaders, who actually is an indigenous woman. Jude Beko is her name. She's from New Mexico. And in her tribe, they have a saying, and I like it very much. They say, what if our best future is still ahead of us? And it is. That best future is a future of every part of the world being a clean, green economy. We get rid of fossil fuel that is killing people through indoor pollution, indoor, terrible diseases that come from pollution, asthma, etc. And, you can imagine the cities will be so much better. We'll have gardens, and every building will produce its own electricity. And we'll have even food produced in ways of producing within cities. But the countryside, there'll be rewilding, renewable. Agriculture will be part of the solution because it will be sustainable agriculture in a true sense. We can get excited about these things. And I think that's important because, yes, we are facing our best times ahead of us, but we're also potentially facing our worst times. So that's why in schools and with teachers in class, you must be insisting, we have to have our best times. I want my future. And that's where you feel stronger when you feel you have a choice. And it is going to be difficult. We're going to have a kind of what I call a moonshot mentality over the 7 years to 2030 next January. Think about it. 2030 is around the corner. But in those 7 years, we have to reduce by 45% carbon emissions. We have to really bring back much more biodiversity, protect our oceans, protect our species. And I want to end with something that Nelson Mandela said, and he brought together the group of elders, former presidents and high-level human rights activists, etc., whom I now chair. And Nelson Mandela said to us, "It always seems impossible until it is done." And he also, Kofi Annan, the last chair of the elders, said something equally profound, which is very relevant to your summit. It is never, you are never too young to lead, and you are never too old to learn. You are never too young to lead, and you are never too old to learn. So bear all this in mind and have the best summit possible and play your role. Thank you very much.